What up, y'all? It's Dom, and today we're talking about the Leica Q versus the Leica Q2. Which of these cameras I think is better for you, and which one I think is a better value. Let's get into it. So I bought a Leica Q about, I'd say 8 months to a year ago now, and I've shot it a ton. I've used it as my daily carry camera, and I absolutely love it. But there are some shortcomings with this camera, and it made me pick up a Leica Q2. I actually found this camera on a fantastic deal. I had no plans of buying it, but the seller really didn't know the market value, so I got it for about $1,000 less than what it's currently worth. Now, in all honesty, I originally bought it to flip it and make a little bit of money, maybe test it out for a review or two as well. But then I started shooting it, which was an absolute mistake because I also fell in love with this stupid camera. But that's neither here or there. My bank account is crying, but I can bring you this video of a Leica Q versus a Q2. First of all, I want to touch on image quality because in the big picture of things, that's what's most important with both of these Leicas. Now, the Leica Q, shooting it over the last, 8 months to a year, I never once thought, man, I wish I had more. I wish I had more data, or I wish I had more this or that. I love the image quality coming out of it, and I was always absolutely thrilled with the pictures that I got. Excellent dynamic range, good low light capabilities, good sharpness, beautiful colors. JPEGs are also outstanding. They're just, in terms of image quality, nothing I complained about or really wanted. Then enter the Q2. And as I'm sure you've already seen, they doubled up the data coming out of this camera. So we're in the 40s of megapixels, whereas in the Q, you're only in the 20s. More on the pros and cons of that later, but really absolutely no surprises here. The image quality is outstanding in the Q2. Beautiful low light capabilities still, good saturation, excellent depth of field. This lens is really fantastic, as is on the Q. Good dynamic range. I mean, the shadows and highlights are really stunning straight out of camera. These are almost the cameras that if you want very little to nominal post-processing and manipulation of your colors and such in post, these cameras deliver the most realistic image I've ever experienced out of any cameras I've ever shot. But let's touch more on the differences in the sensors here. This new Q2 comes with a 47.3 effective megapixel full frame sensor. Sensor is absolutely outstanding, as I already talked about. And in the Leica Q, you're getting a 24 megapixel sensor, so more than double the data coming out of the Q2. And I'm sure when you first hear those numbers, as I did, you would think that's absolutely a positive, right? Well, not so fast. After actually hands-on using these in real-world use, I would say there are definitely some pros and cons to that 47.3 megapixels versus the 24. First of all, with the 47.3 megapixels, as I've seen with many full-frame sensors with high megapixel count, the low-light capabilities deteriorate ever so slightly. I wouldn't say it's extremely noticeable in the Q2, but I definitely noticed that my eye was more pleased with the images coming out of the Q in low light than in the Q2. Now, that being said, the autofocus is faster and the metering is faster and more capable in the Q2 in low lights. So there is a trade-off. I found the Q2 to be more efficient and faster in low light capabilities, but I actually slightly like the images coming out of the Q. Also, when talking about a high megapixel count, you have sharpness to factor in. The more the megapixels, the sharper the images, and that is definitely the case with the Q2. In looking at these side by side, I definitely found that the Q2 images are very sharp, almost too sharp for my liking. Now, I did look at this in post. When I'm pixel peeping is when I saw the sharp details in the corners and whatnot, and that's when I kind of saw some things that I didn't really like. When I step back and look at the image as a whole, if I'm not cropping at all, the Leica Q has everything I want. The Q2 has a little tinge of sharpness that I really didn't like. But that extra data of the Q2 definitely gives you a lot more picture to work with in post. The Leica Q, if you are cropping or rearranging your photo at all in post, that 24 megapixels shrinks really quick and you tend to get a little bit of mushiness, a little bit of softness and pixelation if you are punching in with any significance. Whereas the Q2, you have so much data to work with. Cropping in on those images really isn't a worry at all. For a lot of you shooters out there, that flexibility is really nice to have. You don't have to sit there and take the time to have expert perfect composition in every single shot. You could just shoot your shot, crop it later in post and not have to worry about it. So up next, I want to talk about the crop modes on the Q2 because that is something that I absolutely wanted when looking at this camera and having the Q. I really wish I had a little bit more of a 50mm or a 35mm lens or 75mm on the Q2. I just thought that would be so nice to have. It's like having everything you want in your pocket with the Q2. And although that sounds really great in theory, that's actually not reality when it comes to actually real world use with the Q2. Let me explain. So first of all, when you shoot an image with a 28mm lens and you go into the other modes like the 35 or the 50 or the 75, all you're essentially doing is just cropping in digitally on that image. It's the exact same as taking the raw image, putting it in Lightroom, and then cropping in on that image to give it a smaller field of view. But the compression, the distortion, the depth of field, everything about the image stays the same as if it were shot on a 28mm lens and then just cropped in. And that's really important to understand because you are not really changing the image at all optically. You're not getting any different distortion or any different compression on your subject, which really doesn't make the image look like it is shot on a 50mm. For example, you guys have, I'm sure, seen that really famous video of a photographer that took a picture of someone's face with all different lenses on there. Started all the way from a wide and went all the way to a 200mm. And that face changes shape as the lenses change because of the different distortion and compression of the optics that are on the camera. And that's what you do not get when you change modes with the Q2. If you shoot a portrait of someone's face on the 28mm and then you shoot that exact same image of that same face on the 50mm mode, you're gonna get the exact same shape and compression of that face. It's just gonna be punched in a little bit so the outside of the face is gonna be cropped out. So once you understand the theory of the technology behind the crop modes, you understand that the picture really isn't changing and it's just a convenience feature that it's cropping it in camera for you, and so you don't have to do it in post. And thankfully with the Q2, what I love about it is you could shoot RAW plus JPEG and then you will always have the RAW 28mm photo, the original photo that they cropped in on. After real world use and using it extensively, I found myself always pretty much going back to the 28mm RAW file and then adjusting it to my liking and cropping somewhere in between that 35 or 50mm mode, depending on the composition. And honestly, I really never liked any of the images coming out of the 75mm crop. It was just pushed in way too much. You lost way too much data. I think I found effective megapixel at that push is about 8 megapixel, which is just not enough. You found pixelation, mushiness, the quality just really deteriorates there. Now I've touched on some things that they updated with the Q2 that I'm just like, meh, okay, that's cool. But now I want to touch on things they updated that I'm absolutely in love with. These are the things that I think make it worthwhile for some people to upgrade. Number one, the power switch on the Leica Q is one of the things I hate the most about this camera. It feels flimsy. It feels like it's gonna break and not good quality. It also integrates single shot versus continuous shot modes on there. So to turn the camera on, many times I'm going into the mode I don't want and I'm just getting extra pictures. It's not a deal breaker per se, but it's one of the things I really hate and found annoying. In the Q2 though, they heard our complaints and changed the power switch to a nice beefy quality switch that only turns the camera on and off. They moved the continuous shooting modes into the menu, so a big win there for the Q2. Up next, the button layout is changed in the Q2, and I think it's a big positive. The thing I like the most is they changed the function button onto the exposure compensation dial to be programmable, but I leave it on ISO function so that I don't have to use a button on the back like I do on the Q, and it just really makes it feel much more fluid and easy to use in real world use. On the Q, it just feels really cheap and poor placement to have this ISO next to the display on the back, so I constantly had to chimp to change the ISO, and then it would take me 2 or 3 buttons to get to the ISO that I really wanted. Whereas in the Q2, I just hit the button, I move the exposure dial to choose my ISO, and I'm in and out very quickly and very efficiently. But not just the ISO button, all the buttons on the Q2 feel better. They feel bigger, beefier, more tactile, like they're gonna last a really long time, and I just like the way that feels. But that being said, the buttons on the Q, although they are smaller and feel a little bit flimsier, the Qs are tanks, man. These things are still running. I have no issues at all. A 6-year-old camera, and although I hate that power switch up top, it's still functional. I have no issues with it at all in multiple Qs that I've shot. So really no complaints with quality control. Now the biggest update in my opinion from the Q to the Q2 is that the Q2 is weather sealed. And I think a lot of videos that I've seen on YouTube downplay the fact that that's a really big deal in these cameras, and let me tell you why. Seeing as these Leica cameras are not meant to stay in a bag protected, these are meant to be everyday carry cameras on your shoulder getting beat up that you're taking with you everywhere. And that's where the concern lies that the Q is not weather sealed, because I'm taking this camera to the beach or in dewy weather or early morning in San Francisco when it's super foggy. And it's always been a concern of mine to have a little bit of condensation or wetness seep into the camera, and then you really are screwed because it's not an interchangeable lens system. That worry, and especially the price point of these aren't cheap cameras, always led me to not want to take the Q out in any type of wetness or moisture or beach type situations. And it was always something I wished would be changed. And with the Q2, you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about dust or mold or wetness or dewiness getting in and destroying your camera because it is fully weather sealed. That's a really big plus. It gives you a big peace of mind that your camera can go anywhere with you, can travel with you all over the place, and it's just something that I worry about with the Leica Q. But there are also some trade-offs with that. With the full weather sealing that comes in on the Q2, you now don't have any ports at all. So there's no type of expansion, no type of plug-in charging, nothing. It is just the solid body, the battery, and the SD card slot, and that is it. Where on as the Q, you do have some micro USB slots, so you can get some expansion or charging or whatnot. But again, you are giving that up with weather sealed. So I guess I have to bring up video here, although I really don't want to with these cameras because video sucks in general with both of these. If you need video and video capabilities, look elsewhere. These are not the cameras for you. But if this is the only camera that you're going to be carrying with you every day, maybe video is important and maybe you want to shoot some 4K clips, if you will. If that is the case, you definitely need to get the Q2 because it does have 4K and it does have some slow motion 1080 capabilities that are actually nice, whereas the Q does not have those capabilities. So that, again, if that's an essential value for you, definitely you need to buy the Q2. Now, in terms of user interface and ease of use, the menu system is updated on the Q2. I do like it better. It is easier and they have some quick menu features that I really like. But with the Q, I didn't have any complaints. It wasn't as if I was shooting on my Sonys that have horrible menu systems. I never minded the menu system on the Q, and in fact, I really liked it. So it is an upgrade on the Q2, but definitely something that isn't a negative on the Q. Lastly, in terms of physical changes, they did change the aperture and focus ring on the front. They are a little bit beefier and more tactile on the Q2, although again, that wasn't a negative on the Q. I didn't find those to be hindrances or something that bothered me at all. Just something to know that they changed on the Q2. All right, so the big question, which one should you buy? And I think this really comes down to money. Greenbacks, dead presidents, that's what it's all about. Let me get into value. So when it comes to both of these cameras, they're not cheap. Currently, the Qs run about $2,500 to $3,000 on the used market, and the Q2s are about $5,500 new, but run used about $5,000. So we are talking double the price for the Q2, and really the question shouldn't be, is the Q better than the Q2? Because in my opinions, in all intents and purposes, yes, it is a better camera. It's newer, it's updated. Everything about it is a little bit better than the Q. But in answering the question of which camera I think is better for you, I think for 80 to 90% of photographers out there, the Leica Q is actually a better camera, and that all comes down to value. The value of this camera is really, really underrated, and let me tell you why. Let's say you want a full frame camera. This camera comes in at about $2,600. That's gonna get you like a Sony a7 III, a7 IV maybe, a Canon R5, R6, maybe the Nikon full frame cameras. That's gonna get you a camera body only from the Nikon, Sony, and Canon. And then you add in the 28mm f1.7 lens. And if you're gonna add that to a Sony a7 IV package, now you're gonna be $4,000 plus, because that lens in the Sony lineup is gonna cost you $1,500 plus. Same thing with Canon and Nikon. So value, the Leica Q is a really, really good value. If you're a 28mm photographer, you want an f1.7 lens and you want it in full frame format, this is gonna be the best bang for your buck, which is weird to say for the Leica. Yes, it doesn't give you the flexibility, but the value is absolutely there. Whereas I cannot say that for the Leica Q2. The value is not there. When you're gonna pay $5,500 for a camera, $5,000 used, well, now you can get a lot of camera for that price point, a lot of bodies and a lot of lenses. So the value just isn't there for the Q2. Really, you're paying for image quality, you're gonna pay for quality of the body, build quality, and you're gonna pay for that Leica brand. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. Now, hell, if you got it, flaunt it, right? Ball out, get yourself a Q2. But the answer to the question is, which camera should you buy? And my argument is that for 80 to 90% of the photographers out there, including myself, I don't need need the extra capabilities and the extra features that come with the Q2, my money is better spent on the Q and saving myself a few bucks getting a good value, and then maybe upgrading down the road when the Q2 comes down in price even further. Mind you, that is barring those essential features that if you do need, you have to get the Q2. But the answer to the question is, I think the better camera for most of you guys out there is the Leica Q. Try to find one in excellent condition in that price point, and I think you'll be really, really happy. But let's be really clear here. If the question is which one's a better camera, the answer is the Leica Q2. It's got more features that's going to keep your investment safe and easier to use on a daily basis. But which camera is a better buy for the value and for the money? That answer is the Leica Q. So if you guys are interested in buying a Leica Q, check out my full review video on this camera here. It is my personal camera with some real world long time use. Also check out my review video of these leather half shell cases. These come in at under 25 bucks. Highly recommend. Links for those in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, hit me with a subscribe and a thumbs up for more. It really helps out my little small channel here. I appreciate you guys. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.